Good evening, Word on the Curb. Welcome back, family. It's good to have you. Tonight, I have two very special guests with me our main speaker, Baye Kemit, and a second host tonight, Jonette Smart. I'm happy to be here tonight because this conversation started some time back, I think in the maybe early summer, where we were talking about what's going on in Trenton, and Nicole Nolan kicked it off. But Baye and I both jumped in, and Baye has been around doing the work for a very, very long time. The work of the people, of and for and by the people. And so I thought it only worthy that he'd be here with us this evening and that he drive the conversation. Before we get started, we're on YouTube and we're on Facebook. Please, on YouTube, hit the like, subscribe, and share. Again, as I tell you often, this is one of those times we want you to put all of our business in the street, this business. We're on Facebook at What Trenton Really Makes and Word on the Curb podcast. Please help me welcome my guests tonight, Baye Kemit and Jonette Smart. And so, Baye, we're going to start quite simply and we're going to kick it for a minute. And it might get a little uncomfortable for some folks out there, but that's okay. Because what we're talking about is what's going on in Trenton. What do you think, Baye?
Oh, wow, that's a loaded question for the first to start off, right? What's
It
going on with
sure
Trenton?
is, but that is the discussion.
I'm actually uh, had someone very close to my family um, was killed over the weekend in Trenton. Young man, Bilal Lewis, um, was the father of my great niece.
Hmm.
So my sister's granddaughter, my sister's daughter, 9 years old, now has to grow up without a father.
Father
Now,
versus.
generally, when we think about violence in Trenton, we think, what was he doing? It's kind of like a preemptive question in your mind. Was he in the streets? Was he in the gangs? Was he selling drugs? And this young man wasn't doing any of those things. He
Nope.
was working. He was picking his daughter up from the after-school program
Hmm.
every day. He was an involved father, an involved parent, and just was out Saturday night. And his friend said to him, "Hey man, let's take a ride." And when they arrived at where they were going on Brunswick Avenue, from my understanding, he was misidentified, or a person was looking for someone else, and ended up shooting him multiple times, where he died in the street. So I lead with that in that Trenton, and it's kind of hard talking to about Trenton, even though I'm from Trenton. Trenton people get real into their feelings. We can't have a political discussion about the realities of the city. People get they're very thin-skinned sometimes, but the reality is that Trenton is a very violent, dangerous city. It's not unlike most small urban cities, but it is peculiar in that it's the capital of New Jersey, and it's peculiar in that it's nestled in one of the most racist counties in the country. And that's another discussion that we don't often have about Trenton, is that it's up against so much adversity because of Mercer County and because of the state of New Jersey. Now, you can take the state of New Jersey like any other state in America, so they're all racist. But when you think about Mercer County, and you think about a Ewing Township, a Hamilton Township, Allentown, Heightstown, Princeton, West Windsor, Lawrence, Lawrenceville. As a black man, all of those places give me tremors to think about even entering into their municipality. As a young man driving my car, we knew we're leaving Trenton. Even to this day, as the age I am now, when I go back to Trenton and I know that I'm leaving Trenton proper, and I'm driving into Hamilton, uh, Bordentown, which is not Mercer County, but Hamilton, Ewing, all of the counties that border Trenton, I know that I have to do 10 to 3, 9 to 3, 10 to 2 on the steering wheel. I have to look left and right, and I make sure that I can't do certain things that you might be able to do in Trenton, because the police are not as vigilant about just little drivers and things of that nature. For the most part, if you're over a certain age, Trenton Police are got other busier things to worry about than pulling people over for a little bit. But you're in there, you're outside of Trenton. It is a very peculiar place for Black people. But Trenton, in particular, politically, is now losing its foothold in terms of being the predominantly demographic, the predominant demographic. Um, I think that Trenton is for Black Trenton. I would speak to. We have lost grip and hold of our political, economic, social, and if I didn't say it, political power, if we ever had any. I'm talking to a former council person under Doug Palmer, and at that time for me, and I debate and argue with a lot of my people in Trenton about how good the Palmer years were or were not. And I tend to be on the side of, well, it was better than what we have now. And this has nothing particularly to do with Doug, but it kind of does, you know. I think that whether it was good or bad, there was a lot of things that were masked during those time periods where we could have a Heritage Days, or we can have a 3,000 people at a basketball summer league basketball game in the city, or you can have just just different events that brought Black people together in the city, and how Trenton was as a city at the time is much different than what it is today. And so we lost something. Something was lost. And I don't know if Black Trenton will ever be able to get that back because of where we are as a people, where we are as a nation, but and particularly where Trenton is and seated in one of the most racist counties in America.
So, thank you for that. Jonette, let me hear your take. What's going on in Trenton?
Well, a lot of what Baye has said is true, but I think one of the main things of what's going on in Trenton is it's everybody's grabbing for a power that's non-existent. No one wants to share or wants to be behind the other in terms of leadership. Everybody wants to be a leader. And a lot of it stems from Baye happened to mention the Palmer administration. Well, a lot of Trentonians feel that the Palmer hierarchy is still involved and still turning the wheels to what happens in our city. And that makes for some interesting discussion, but it also makes for a lot of turbulence, I would say, within the city structure. We don't have a real strong Black leadership in the city of Trenton. We don't even have a cohesive leadership in our city. When we look at our past in terms of city councils, I can't really recall when we've had a really good one, except for possibly back during the Palmer years, where even if there was some contention, that contention wasn't necessarily put out in the public. Now it seems like everybody wants to display their differences in public, and in particular, our council people. I think our community reacts to what our leaders bring us. And when our leaders bring us conflict, that leads to conflict in our communities. And thus far, we have an administration that doesn't seem to be able to handle regulations and policies in terms of getting budgets done on time, following the Department of Community Affairs in terms of what it is that we're supposed to be doing and getting our structure together. And so it creates a lot of chaos within the administration, which then presents itself to the community. So it seems like we don't know what's going on, or we don't have a good grip, a good grasp of what we should be doing as a city. We are surrounded by some racist communities, I would say. Not to say that everybody in those communities are racist, but there is racism within the political structure as well as within the law enforcement structure. And it's not just Black men who feel intimidated by these powers, but it's also Black women. I mean, I kind of am more alert when I go to certain neighborhoods or certain areas or certain parts of Mercer County than I am in my backyard, Trenton. And it's not to say that because Baye and I have said that, it's not to say that we aren't following the laws of the road. We're just more alert and more conscious of it when we go into particular areas around our community. But I think, I used to say I would never want to leave Trenton. I'm born and raised here, been here all my life, and I never had a desire to leave Trenton until the past, I say 4 to 3 years, because it doesn't seem like it's growing. It doesn't seem like it's doing anything. And when there is change, the change doesn't seem to affect us, the common taxpayer, the urban dweller, the poor residents that we have. And our economic growth has not moved. They claim to say that the average family income for the city of Trenton is around $32,000 a year. $32,000 a year. I totally disagree with that. I think it's way below that. I think that our healthcare system is horrible. It sucks. I think that our political angles, our political representatives don't seem to get what it is our city needs, because I think if they did get it, we would be much better than what we are currently. And I don't know how we change that. I don't know how because you get who steps up in front to do the job, right? So certain people say, well, I want to be council person, or I want to be mayor, or whatever. And those people step up and they run for these offices, and then they're elected. But the thing that happens after the election is that we as citizens, we as taxpayers, we as community people don't hold those people accountable for what they said they were going to do and for what we say we need as a community. So there's a lot going on here that interrupts with what's happening. We have a lot of gang violence, and it's not really it's not necessarily African American on African American gang violence. A lot of it is coming from the other cultures in our community, our Hispanic cultures, our Latina cultures, who are now a large part of the city of Trenton. We have a huge Latino presence. And again, not to say that all Latinos are bad, because not all Black people are bad and not all white people are bad. But there's a culture that exists here in this city where these gangs are out there again, and they are harming one another, injuring innocent people, bystanders, such as what happened to Baye's niece's father. And not to say that was a Latino group that did it, but I would probably bet it had something to do with the gang mistaken identity. And it doesn't seem like our law enforcement has a grip on how to handle these things. So there's a lot going on here. Am I afraid to be here? No, I like my city. It is, it can be a scary town at times, but I tell you, if things don't change, I'm thinking about making a change.
Can I add to that? If you have another question?
I do.
Go ahead.
I'd like to add too, if I may, before we go. What I'd like to say about this is simply this. Racism is here. It's been here.
Mm-hmm.
It may be more blatant now than it's ever been, because 45 was in office and opened the door for everybody to take the shades off, take the covers off, be who you are. But that being said, Trenton is a very violent place. And Baye, to you and my sorority sister, Princess Lewis, and her husband, I offer my condolences, because your family member did not deserve to die like that, as many others don't. I think when we talk about violence, we have to ask ourselves, why? And I'm talking about us.
Mm-hmm.
There's others, but I'm talking about us.
Mm-hmm.
This is us. Why do we feel so comfortable killing each other?
Mm.
What happened to, square up,
Mm.
hit the gym, hit the park and duke it out? What happened to that? Music and media,
Mm.
in addition to many other things, poverty.
Mm.
Rich folks will tell you, as one did today in a podcast that I was listening to, that it is better for children to be born into poverty because then they learn, he said, they learn how to fend for themselves. I
Mm.
disagree with that.
Mm. Mm.
Excuse me. Every child deserves a chance. Relative to our elected officials, I'll tell you what's wrong. And as an elected official, I made many mistakes, but I'll tell you what's wrong. Most people don't know their role.
Mm.
So when you talk about people wanting to be elected, they're usually elected based on personality
Mm.
and not principles
Mm.
or projects or any history relative to the office they want to hold.
Correct.
Just because I'm smart doesn't mean I'm prepared for elected office. Just because I know 90% of the people doesn't mean I'm prepared. Council's role is policy and budget.
Mm.
And in the past, we've had a council that had the everything right in the palm of their hands and they spent their time fighting.
Mm.
They could have gotten jobs, contracts, changed policy because they had the votes. Unlike across New Jersey, that's never happened the way it happened in Trenton,
Mm.
where the president had the votes and spent time fighting with a mayor who couldn't have moved without their say so if they understood their roles.
Exactly.
And so, budget and policy belongs to the council. The mayor in our former government, strong mayor and council is responsible for running the ship. They steer the ship
Mm.
and they bring the plans for the ship to the council.
Mm.
It's the council's responsibility to review it and approve it or deny it,
Mm.
not based on personalities, but based on principles. We've lost sight of that. And Baye and Jonette, I would say simply for those who are listening, and we have a few on here, that what we need to grow has gone the way of family dinners on Sundays. Remember those?
Mm.
When we all got together and no matter what we were feeling or thinking on Sunday, we knew we could go to Big Mama's house or whoever the matriarch was guiding the family at that time. We could go there and have dinner and fight and go home and be okay. Because at
Mm.
family dinners, everybody doesn't get along. But the point is, people have to understand their roles. They've lost sight of that. And everything they do is typically predicated upon how you might be feeling about them. And how you're feeling about them doesn't make good policy happen unless you're voting. And we'll get to that. Go ahead, Baye. You had some things you wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, when I was opening up, there were some other things I really wanted to point to, and I'll just make it as brief as I can. Poverty plays a major role in why we have all of what we spoke about today. When you have a city where 11% of the uh, city has college degree, or like we said, I forget what percentage I just read.
Excuse me for 1 minute. Did either of you invite somebody to the podcast?
Yes, most
Because
certainly.
you did.
Yes.
I'm going to allow them onto the screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Here they
But
are.
if I'm not mistaken, I think we were looking at the percentage recently of those that are under the poverty line, or what's the? But you mentioned 32,000 of. No, I
PMAC, I
didn't.
need you to turn your camera on.
No, I didn't invite anybody. No, I invited them
You
to
didn't?
view the event, not anyone. I didn't invite anyone on.
Okay. Well, he or they are under the impression that they were.
No, I didn't invite anybody to join us. Mm-mm.
I'm removing it. I'm removing them from the stage. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that when we couple the poverty with the low education level of the city, it's a breeding ground for all of the things that we're speaking to. And when we talk about education in the city of Trenton, it's a real shaky ground because most of the people, if you look left and right, don't have that level of education. And so people start, you hear a lot of comments, but you don't need a college degree to do X, Y, and Z. You don't need this. And it's not really so much about college as much as it is about putting a high school graduate out into the world that most times is ill prepared for the world, ill prepared to think, ill prepared in character, ill prepared in being able to have social skills, to be able to engage people in the public. So it really is beyond just a college degree as much as there's the people that we can put into the world and say, we need you to go out and be leaders, to be able to work in the workforce. And so you see it throughout the country where these young people are,
Hmm.
that you can't approach them, have any kind of conversation with them because of how they relate to people. And this happens from a very early age in elementary school. You have, when you go into the average urban elementary school, and that could be from Trenton all the way to anywhere I go all around the country into different schools. And you see it at the elementary level. Children are cussing at each other. Teachers are cussing at the kids. Teachers are cussing at each other. You go to the middle school, everybody's cussing each other out. Parents is cussing teachers out, teachers cussing kids. And then you go to high school, it's the same thing. And so when we have to engage with high school students on our HBCU college tour every year, this is just like law. The children don't have respect for adults anymore in terms of, oh, that's an adult, let me not cuss. Oh, that's a
Mm.
child, let me not use profanity. Like, it's just the leveling, the playing field has been leveled. A lot of that have to do with social media. So, for example, if I have a
Yep.
social media page, a young, teenager think that they can come directly into your page and talk directly to an adult back and forth.
Right.
Whereas in real life, you would not do that. But a lot of people allow their children to
To do
engage
that.
adults in that kind of manner. So we just have a moral decay all the way around when we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about where we are as a people in the city of Trenton. We look at I had put a post up one time listing like 5 major things, and one of them we could talk about religion, and I think I juxtaposed it against the city like Atlanta. Whereas you talk about the religion, right? You look at the churches and what the churches were doing in the civil rights movement versus what our churches are doing today. All right. You look at politics, the civil rights movement, what young people were doing at that time and what young people are doing today. Most
Mm-hmm.
of their brushes with any type of political engagement was the Black Lives Matter movement. And what they mostly seen was some type of um, uh, uh,
Hmm.
disruption. I don't want to say rioting because I would say some fighting back in that type of sense, but nothing that was changing the entire public system in terms of the school system or public transportation or anything in that manner, right? Or even pushing young people to become engaged in politics. And we look at education. Trenton has one of the worst school districts in the state, right? And so it's multi-level. And then we talk about poverty and we talk about all of those things together. You get the violence that you get in a city. And so we can't really start. I mean, all of the things that we mentioned today I mean, I'm just mentioning racism just to kind of throw it out there because I think that a lot of times when we have discussions about our people, we kind of skate around racism. So I'm just going to always throw it out there on the table just so we can be honest, have an honest dialogue. But I think that when we look at education, because I'm an educator, if we're not going to be honest about teaching our children about themselves, we're going to forever produce children that are we're producing. We're going to forever produce children that are not going to be engaged in school. The 11%, and that's 11% college graduates in the city. That's not the percentage of those that actually, because I think Trenton, I just looked at 74% high school graduates. So 74% out of that 74%, only 11% of those graduate from college. So maybe a larger percent go to college, but only about 11% graduate. So we're talking about a population that probably didn't go to school, that are out here in the workforce, that are working menial jobs. A lot of times they get disengaged with the menial jobs, so they end up on the streets doing something that is probably going to be nefarious to gain money, and it's just a vicious cycle. So the city doesn't really have any infrastructure to even help these type of children, to help these families. And I'm moving to, like, I'm at a community center right now that is state of the art, but it's not the only state of the art. Most of them in the city are state of the art community centers. Our families deserve better. They deserve to be able to go to a community center. And I know that they just renovated the West Ward, not, our West Ward council person. And I lived in the West Ward at one point. So I was a stickler about the West Ward community center. I remember Zach Chester was a council person, and every council person after that, I used to say to them, one time I saw Zach Chester at Moody Park with a little boy, and they were out there doing something. And I said, wow, you're at Moody because you know that the parks in Trenton aren't good enough for you to take this young man to have fun, but you have to go to Ewing. I think that's something you should do something about as a council person. Either advocate or go into your private bag and find private money and help bring those resources to our city. That's what our community needs. We need council people that's going to bring private money in, because in addition to what Ms. Lartigue said, we need people that are going to use their resources to bring resources to our people. If not, we're going to continue to get dilapidated, community centers, schools, public facilities, and things of that nature. So not to go on a diatribe, but I just had to add that to our discussion.
I think it's a great point. I used to raise money to send kids from West Trenton to camp. Personally, I did that. And I work with a few people in that. But you said something else that's really interesting. The infrastructure. Until people understand, and this is hard for folks. We have somebody in the comments saying that they think the racism is worse here than it is in North Carolina. I've lived in both places. I beg to differ. And Baye
I live
is
in
saying,
Georgia, and I think the racism in New Jersey is worse than Georgia. And
okay,
this is me talking, because I can identify
that's,
racism
yeah,
anywhere.
Georgia, right?
I live
But
in
see,
Georgia.
Georgia's doing something different with us. We're doing something different in Georgia. And it's not perfect, but it is different. So, and then she says, Baye, I love the fact that you didn't just talk, you actually did something, started at school. Yeah, I agree with that.
That sounds like my
And
mom.
that's not your mother. But no, you did. And that's why it was so important for me to have you on here, because um, we don't agree on every issue, but I absolutely appreciate the dialogue. I appreciate it because I know you're coming from a place in your heart and mind that supports people. And I appreciate that. And so one of the things that people, need to understand is solidarity is what it's all about. We don't always have to be in lockstep with how we, deal with it, but that we have it. And so thank you for that. Parents got to step up their game too, because I'm here to tell you, having
Can
worked
I
at the board
comment
of
on that,
social.
Annette?
Yes,
If
please
you don't
do.
mind.
Yes.
I want to go into something that Baye has said when it talks about our education system. And I've been an advocate fighting for education in the city of Trenton for about 10, maybe 11 years now. And one of the things I find quite interesting is the people who run the Trenton School District are highly educated. They have degrees. Some have multiple degrees. Some have doctorate degrees, and they sit in these meetings and they talk about what they can and can't do, but it's never around what is best for the children.
Right.
It basically has to do with budgeting. There's nothing that you talk about where you can engage the children in wanting to learn, make the children feel good about themselves, because some of them do come from an environment that's very turbulent and disruptive and unfriendly and uncaring. And so when they get to school, that should be a place that's warm and open and welcoming and to a learning structure. And when we have discussions with these school leaders, it always boils down to budget, 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 budget. But one thing I find that irritates me the most with the Trenton district is that the budget seems to go to the administrators. I don't know why we need so many assistant principals, assistant superintendents, whatever. And we get these large number of these individuals, but yet the problems remain the same, and in some instances are worse. We have a ninth grade academy that is full of turmoil every day. There's something going on in that school that should not be happening. There are fights that break out at least weekly, if not every day.
Mm-hmm.
And, people say, well, it's all the wards coming together at once and they've never been together before. And they bring all kind of excuses as to why these things occur, but there's no looking at how do we resolve these issues? How do we build leaders within that structure who come from different parts of the city, but we look at those things to make these people leaders versus enemies. These kids don't learn, and I ain't trying to be funny or nothing. I raised my grandson. He grew up in the Trenton system, the Trenton district,
Mm-hmm.
and had I not been able to give him outside help from Rutgers University, College of New Jersey, those types of institutions to enhance his learning, he would have been stuck in that situation as well. I think that we have got to do better when it comes to serving our kids. And I've always said we need to start at the lower level versus middle school and high school, because by the time you get to middle school, your mind is already set in how you're going to react moving forward. And if we don't get them when they're younger,
Mm-hmm.
and try to change how they see school, how they look at school, how they feel about learning, then the middle school, as Baye say, they cussing you out in middle school. They cussing out
Right.
teachers. They walk in the halls. They being who they want to be. And then by high school, it's all about fighting. The new high school, Trenton Central High School, the fights that broke out in that school in these past few years, and then the administration doesn't want to take heed that it is a problem. One young girl last 2 years, she got knocked out so bad that her cognitive skills are deteriorating, and the parent went before the school board begging and pleading to help her child, and they did absolutely nothing for her. Till in fact, what's the next step in that? It's getting a lawyer and it's suing. Why do our parents always have to get lawyers and sue in order for change to occur in our cities, in our educational systems? We should not have to do that. Advocates should not have to fight so hard just to get itty bitty things that our kids need in the classroom: assistance, special needs, transportation. We should not have to fight so hard for this. And every single year, these parents, not the same parents, but even new parents that bring their kids into the system, have to fight for stuff. And it's not fair to the parent. And as for parents, I will say this. I don't say this about every parent, but when we look at what happened in our cities with the crack epidemics and the other type of drug influctuations that were purposely put into urban cities, and then we talk about our parents need to do better, half of them don't know how to do better.
Right.
Half of them weren't taught themselves how to do better. And so what do they go by? They go by what they see on television. They go by what they see in media. They go by social media. And to verify that, there was a young lady who had her and her daughter dressed alike. And this girl must have been going to kindergarten, the young girl going to kindergarten. You know what the mother did? Posed with a picture of her young daughter. Both of them had their middle finger up in the air saying F you. This is a small child with her parent. Her parent had her mirroring her with the outfit and the attitude. As Baye said, our young people have no moral compass whatsoever and have total disrespect for adults. Because if somebody had went up to that young lady and said, I'm sorry, but I don't think you should be teaching your daughter that, or that's not cute, she would have cussed you out or tried to fight you. And what are we going to do? And it's not just, and let me just say this, it is not just our children doing this, but we are around our children, so we see it with our children, but it is all of these young people, Black, white, Hispanic, whatever, taking on this attitude about how they present to you in public and how they present to you could never disrespect the elder when we were growing up.
That elder would knock you out.
And then you get knocked out at home again.
By your parents.
You could never
But the
disrespect the
idea
elder.
is parents need some representation because a lot of them are not all, but a lot are not prepared to engage the school board. I think outside a box that doesn't even exist. So I'm not in the box or out of it. It doesn't exist for me sometimes. And in that, I think parents need a union to represent them. And I think that the PTA does as much as it can, but it's not working. A union would better represent the needs and the interests of parents, just as the teacher union does. The administrators don't have a union because they are, assigned by the superintendent. I think that there are a lot of good teachers in the system.
Oh,
I
yes.
think like Baye, there's a lot of good schools, but what's happening at home is making a tremendous impact in schools.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You said something real quick. I like to intersect this one point when we talk about school and education. We look at this notion of urban schools when we have predominantly Black students, we have predominantly white teachers. But nowhere on the planet can you find a school with predominantly white students and predominantly Black teachers.
Nowhere.
True. Very true.
And the other thing that's happening that we have to pay attention to, this is not a slight, it's a reality. Our inner cities are sanctuaries and they're overrun with undocumented immigrants.
Yes.
Who deserve a fair chance and an education. As a result of that, what's also happening is a lot of our teachers, administrators, and people in charge driving curriculum and policy are Latina.
Yep.
And so that should be a partnership.
Yep.
It absolutely has to be a partnership. We're all of color. But I think even in addition to that, Jonette and Baye, what has to happen is, this is a biggie because people don't think it matters. They got to vote.
Yes,
people have to
absolutely.
vote. And you can't vote and walk away talking about, I didn't get a job. It's not all about jobs. It's about policy.
Right.
The policy that's impacting our children.
Absolutely.
The policy, the institutionalized racism.
Absolutely.
That is real.
Yes.
It's happening. Until you start voting, elected officials respect numbers.
Yes.
When I was in office, the West Ward held me accountable. They did not, and you can attest to this, Baye, they did not let me off the hook. I did the best I could, but they didn't let me off the hook and they held me accountable. So until people understand they have to vote and there has to be some strong leadership to work that vote.
Absolutely.
And let me say this, if Doug Palmer is coming in as he is in an alliance that I've helped build to encourage people to vote, to connect them to the vote and to help them understand why it's so important and the impact it could make if people understood the power of their vote, I'm with that. The power of the vote is real.
It is
and
very
until
real.
people understand it, it's not going to happen overnight. But until you understand that you have the power to put people in office and take them out, you're going to continue to accept and get what you get.
Exactly.
So, we're going to have to come back again. It's time for us to wrap up. I need a wrap-up statement from both of you, beginning with Baye, our main speaker, and then you, Jeanette, and then we'll bid our audience a good night and come back again to follow up on some of the things. Baye, in another podcast, I want you to delve more into education and why it's so important that parents be involved. So if you're up to that, I'd like to have both you and Jeanette Johnette back to do that. But let's wrap up. What's your wrap up statement? What do you want people to remember about tonight?
I want people to believe that as Black people, we can achieve. we can. I think that I was just telling my wife this today. We're winning, but we're beginning to lose. The fact that we're here, we weren't even supposed to be here, so we are winning, but we are
Right.
beginning to lose on many fronts because the world is moving very quickly in terms of AI and social media and music and all of these things that most of our parents don't have a handle on when it comes to our children. So once we begin to refocus that, we might be able to get back on our winning track. But I want us to know that, as you said earlier, unity. We all can unify around some basic principles. We can change many of the conditions that's going on.
Educating and growing young leaders is one of them. Thank you, Baye. Johnette?
I want people to understand that over the past few years, we have been educating our children in the same way that I was educated as a youngster, that my mother was educated as a youngster, that our siblings were educated as a youngster, and it isn't working. We need to change the way we educate our children, move them into the future, and make them leaders instead of just existing. We can no longer just exist. We must move past that and become great leaders and great advocates, especially advocates. We must advocate for ourselves because no one else is going to do it. So changing how we teach our kids, making education more futuristic, and teaching our children how to advocate for themselves is what I would like.
I like that. I like both of you. What I want people to know and remember about tonight is this. Start talking to your children about what they want to be when they grow up. That doesn't happen in school a lot anymore until they get to the high school level. And by then, there are other things going on. But if you start talking to your children early about what they want to be when they grow up, and then start gearing their education and their activities, social and otherwise, to that, you'll see a big change.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see a big change because kids will understand what it takes to be what they want to be. They can be a ball player, but they can also be the sports management center for those ball players too.
Mm-hmm.
We got to teach our
Exactly.
kids how to make money legitimately. So I want to thank you both for being here with me tonight. I am your host, Annette, here at Word on the Curb. Baye, Kemit, and Jonette Smart are the guests tonight, and they brought some real good information to you. Racism is real. And listen, recognize it and deal with it. Meet it exactly where it is. You know how your parents, my mother used to tell me, Baye, your mother can attest to this because she knew me when I was a kid. I'm going to get you right where you show off at.
Exactly.
Get them where they
I've heard
show
that.
off.
I've definitely heard that.
Get them
Exactly.
where they show off at, okay? Thank you for joining us here this evening at Word on the Curb. We'll see you again soon. Baye and Jeanette will be back again. And Baye, who is an educator,
Yes.
a developer, a creator, and a business owner, he's owned a school. He owns a school, right?
Yes.
That's right. And so he knows what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I have to defer to him. Jeanette has been in the executive field in government, and she knows what she's talking about. When we talk about experience and elected officials, you're looking at what the possibilities could be right here on the screen. Thank you again for joining me, and everybody have a good night.
All right. Have a good
Good
night.
night.
Good night. Thank you.